Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to this event that is jointly being organized by the Deaf Reach program and by Facebook. Today is December 3rd. It is the International Day of People with Disabilities. And to mark this important day, we wanted to have a conversation about how technology can be a great enabler for everyone in Pakistan. We know technology has many benefits. We know it is used by different people in different ways to build community, to connect to economic opportunities, and also to get messages and information across the world. But oftentimes, when we're thinking about technology, we're not thinking about people who might experience technology differently than us. And today's conversation is about how can we make technology accessible for everybody, and particularly, how can we make sure that everybody is able to use technology in a way that is positive and that they're able to keep themselves safe and secure while engaging online. Um, to join me in this extremely important conversation, I have a stellar and star lineup of panelists from across the world, actually. These are a lot of these people are people who are leaders in the field of rights for all and rights for differently abled people in Pakistan. We have people who are practitioners, educators, activists joining us today to share wisdom from across the world. And I will be moderating and facilitating this conversation. This conversation will also be made available on the Deaf Reach Facebook page, so more people can join in the conversation and share with us their important experiences of using technology and what they feel their needs are when it comes to using technology. So, to begin today's important conversation, we thought that instead of starting with sort of an academic point of view, we wanted to share with you a very inspiring and uplifting story of technology in practice. We have joining us today Hassan Ahmed and his sister Maimuna Bashir. Hassan is Pakistan's first deaf social media influencer. He has been using his social media platforms to share different stories about Pakistan and to raise awareness about the deaf community and sign language in Pakistan. And to translate for Hassan, because Hassan will be speaking in sign language, we have joining us his mentor and big supporter and guide, his sister Memuna. So over to Hassan to share his story with us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for inviting me. As you know, my name is Hassan Ahmed, and I born as a deaf. I'm working as a graphic designer from past 2.5 years, and I am also known as Pakistan's first deaf vlogger, and also known as first tourism ambassador for the Discover Holidays to support and to make the inclusive world of tourism. Yes, further. And if I talk about how I get started the vlogging, I used to see the written post of hearing people on the Facebook, but that was not understandable for the deaf people because that written posts were not accessible for the deaf people, and deaf people has their own sign language. So I got the idea, and I always used to take the help of my sister to get the guide about the restaurant and places, which restaurant and place and which food is good. So I thought that idea will help to the deaf community and to make the daily life more inclusive for the deaf people. Okay, so basically, if I talk about how IT or technology helped me a lot, and when I used to see the IT work of my sister, I always get curious that how I how can I learn about the technology, and I started learning about the graphic designing skill, because as a special person, or everyone must have a skill. So I decided to learn about the graphic designing skill. And then I after learning the graphic designing skill, I joined the software house as a UI UX designer as well. And I also nominated for the Young Leaders Conference, which was held in the Lahore. And I was the only one deaf person there. There was no sign language interpreter to make that 6 days even more accessible for me. When I came back, I got the idea कि how I can make this daily life routine accessible for the deaf people, and how can I make the things and products and daily life use things accessible for the deaf people. Okay, so IT or technology has played a vital role in my life. Like if I talk about my story, and I started from the graphic designing skill, and if we teach any skill to the people with special needs, or deaf people, with the help of interpreters, so that people with special needs or deaf people can also make their life better uh, by using the use of technology and IT. So, if I talk about if a government or NGO can support deaf people, how they can support, I want to say that a sign language interpreter must be with the deaf person to teach the graphic designing and any skill to the deaf people. Because when I learned graphic designing, there was no sign language interpreter, and I did by myself all. So now I'm also hosting a TV program as a deaf anchor at K2 TV channel, because I want to make this world more inclusive for the deaf community, and to tell about the ideas how they can use the technology and can they make their life more accessible. Okay, that was all from Hassan's side, that how Hassan has utilized the IT and technology skills to make his life better. Like he just learned the graphic designing skill, and then he's also working as a graphic designer in a software house. And that was not an easy part for him to learn a technical skill and to utilize that skill in the daily life. And not he not only limited to his skills to the graphic designing only. He also started vlogging, and started using the Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so they can they can bring the opportunities for the deaf people about the vlogging. And the one more thing, how can we make accessible, how can we make the brands accessible for the deaf community. Like Hassan also did work with international brands of Spontex Pakistan. He also worked with Talinor. He also worked with other cleaning brands to make the life more accessible for the deaf community, and also to make the brands and products and their marketing strategies for more accessible, so that deaf people can also get a idea about how they can enjoy the daily life things, and for the business as well, that how they can promote their business to the deaf community. That was all from our side.
Thank you, Hassan and Memuna, for sharing your story. I think Hassan is an inspiration for all of us. Um, I have seen his Instagram page, I've seen his videos. They're a lot of fun. I would also encourage all of you to go and check out his Instagram page. There's some great content on it.
Yes, thank
Um,
you.
thank you, Hassan and Mamuna. Um, next, next we are going to have invite our next speaker. Our next speaker who will be joining our panel today is Monica Desai. She is the global head for connectivity and access policy at Facebook. And Monica is going to talk to us about what tools and resources are available on Facebook to make our platforms more accessible for everyone across the world. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you so much, Sahara, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. I'm very honored to be part of this group. And Hassan, your story is incredible and inspiring, and I look forward to checking out your Instagram page. Prior to joining Facebook, I spent over a decade at the Federal Communications Commission, including service as chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, which develops policies and rules related to accessibility. And I was also head of the Media Bureau, which develops video accessibility policies. So accessibility has been a significant part of my career, and which is one of the reasons I'm so proud to be at Facebook, which is a company that is really working hard to improve the accessibility of our products and diversity and inclusion in our workforce. Because the theme of today's panel is empowerment through digital literacy and connectivity, I'd like to take a few minutes of my time to talk in particular about how Facebook's digital literacy programs are empowering people, including people with disabilities, and also about our tools and initiatives that are enabling people to experience the information and connections that are on Facebook. Our mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. And that means everyone. And clearly, accessibility is fundamental to achieving the mission of giving people the power to bring the world closer together. First, I'll highlight a few of the milestones in our work to build a more accessible platform. Our artificial intelligence-driven automatic photo description technology describes objects in photos to people with vision loss through assistive technology called a screen reader. More than 80% of images displayed on Facebook and Instagram now contain automatic photo description technology. This tool, by the way, also supports Urdu, and further investment, we believe further investment at the intersection of AI and accessibility will be vital for building technologies at a global scale that are inclusive for everyone. Our face recognition accessibility tool helps people with vision loss know more about who is in their photos as long as their user settings allow that. Closed captioning helps people with hearing loss use AI. And using AI, we're providing automatically generated captioning for Facebook Live, Workplace Live, Instagram TV, as well as for ads and pages. On Facebook, users can manually upload captions in Urdu, and our automatic captioning tools for ads and pages also support Urdu. We're also working to ensure next generation extended reality technologies, encompassing virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, that are accessible and are working with community and industry organizations to research, document, and distribute accessibility guidelines for XR developers. We co-founded and support Teach Access, which is an award-winning program that's a collaboration of industry, academia, and advocacy that seeks to advance accessibility training in higher education with the goal that future technologies from the start are accessible. The program includes best practices in accessible software design for this very purpose. We've created open source tools for accessibility, which we hope will help accessibility flourish beyond Facebook's own products. And we are working collaboratively with industry leaders to establish and improve accessibility web and assistive technology standards through the World Wide Web Consortium. We're also working to educate users about accessibility tools and options on our platforms that they can use themselves to promote access. We launched a new infographic that explains in easy to understand terms how to make your Facebook and Instagram posts more accessible. These infographics are available on our platform and have been translated into Urdu as well. Our hope is that the simple act of making more people aware of our accessibility tools and how to use them will help them improve access to Facebook at scale. We also want to enable people to activate around change, collaborate in more meaningful ways, and explore innovative new technologies, but do so safely and responsibly. And to promote this ethos of responsibility, we're investing in providing digital literacy to users to help them utilize the internet at its full potential. Our programs are designed for the full variety of audiences, from those that are new to the internet or a digital native who wants to learn more or improve their digital skills with content specifically addressing the needs of students, teachers, businesses, and policymakers. And then finally, in line with this, I'm happy to announce that we've entered into a partnership with Deaf Reach schools in Pakistan. And we just did this in September to adapt Facebook's digital literacy resources, particularly the We Think digital learning resources for students with hearing impairments. There are over 1 million hearing impaired children in Pakistan of school-going age, and yet less than 5% have access to education. These children are among the most vulnerable groups in Pakistan, often lacking access to critical information with regard to health, education, and safety. And with the prevailing COVID-19 situation, online distance learning is a new reality for many students. Ensuring that they understand the risks of going online and staying safe when they are connected is paramount. We've also run a similar program in Thailand where we've adapted Facebook resources for use by hearing impaired small and medium business owners and entrepreneurs to train them on various digital skills, including creating Facebook and Instagram pages and using creative content tools and growing audiences through insight. So we're excited to launch this program in Pakistan and looking forward to similar other initiatives in Pakistan in the future. So with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Sahar.
Thank you, Monica. With that, we are now going to move to Richard Geary. I'd like to invite him. He is the founder and director of programs at the Family Education Services Foundation, which runs the Deaf Reach program. And I would like to ask Richard to talk to us from the point of view of an educator of the importance of technology and digital literacy for people with disabilities. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Sahar, and a big thanks to all the panelists for joining this platform and bringing all their diverse knowledge and wisdom to it. You know, the theme for this year's International Day of Persons with Disabilities is removing barriers to create an inclusive and accessible society for all. I think that's a very big theme to live up to, especially in a developing country like Pakistan, where more often inclusion is an illusion rather than a reality. And I really commend Hassan for his energy and his efforts and being a trailblazer to help be a role model for the deaf community and others with disabilities. I think that's amazing. And I'm glad we were able to include him in this roundtable. And to create that reality of inclusion and accessibility, this is what we're all working to overcome, all of us that are on this platform. And the internet offers us that opportunity to foster greater inclusiveness. But it's not a quick fix solution. And there's a real need to focus on the second part of that theme for the year, which is creating an accessible society. And Hassan clearly illustrated that with his story and the struggles he went through and the challenges he had to overcome. And if you expand that and consider persons with disabilities across Pakistan, they're often hugely marginalized. They lack not only access, but they lack the ability to have access. So this is a huge challenge, and I think it's a clarion call, if you will, for those of us that are having this discussion today to see what practical methods, what practical solutions we can come up with that will make that pathway easier. Because inclusion can only come when those pathways to access are created and fostered. When you consider any career, whether it's a career in the job market or an educational pathway, today more than ever, this requires digital communication at some point in time. But persons with disabilities face many barriers to achieve this kind of equity. And I'm very happy to hear about some of the innovations which Monica described. I think those are amazing. And I think there's so much more that can be done. And when you think about it, think of a blind person who is using a screen reading software, but perhaps that website they're accessing doesn't describe their images, or a deaf person who is unable to participate in a conference just like this because there's no clear captioning available. So these initiatives are really going to be building blocks towards that accessibility. In our Deaf Reach schools, we have 7 Deaf Reach campuses across Pakistan with over 1,000 deaf students, and all of these come from underprivileged, low-income families. They're highly marginalized. As you mentioned, hardly 5% of deaf children in Pakistan have access to education. And what we've seen is that education and access to the internet really creates an amazing cycle of empowerment for a deaf child. All of our students, even though they come from the village where they don't have any devices in their home, when they come to school, they become computer literate and digitally aware. And discussing empowerment, you see, empowerment's not something you do to or for a person, but it's about removing the obstacles that hinder people, enabling them to be all that they can be. So this solution to create inclusion and accessibility really lies by removing barriers, which will then eventually lead to greater inclusion and empowerment. So over the years, Deaf Reach has developed a large pool of digital learning resources in sign language to meet the needs of the deaf community. We've also partnered with leading organizations to add sign language into their content, making their products accessible for the deaf community. This is particularly in the areas of education, and as we're doing now with Facebook content, with safety. We've done this with the government announcements about health during COVID. And this has laid the foundation now for our collaboration with Facebook, who are focusing on building those digital literacy and safety resources. So for the first step in our collaboration, we're working with Facebook to adapt their, we think, digital modules by adding in a sign language component to the videos along with a local voiceover. And this will immediately make all this content accessible to the deaf community countrywide. Following this, we're then going to train all of the teachers across all 7 of our Deaf Reach schools to use them and then deliver these learning tools in their communities. And we'll also work with our students from grade 8 on up. We have a college program and a BA program, and we'll have them participate in these learning workshops. And our ultimate goal is to educate our teachers and students to build a community of responsible digital citizens with these tools that Facebook is providing. And ultimately, our hope is that this will further expand across the deaf community in Pakistan and become accessible for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Um, and we're really looking forward to having our digital literacy materials become accessible for everyone in Pakistan, including the deaf community. Um, when we talk about inclusivity at all levels of society, I think employment opportunities, Hassan talked about this as well, are supremely important for everyone. Um, Next, I would like to invite Umair Ahmed. He is the executive director of Now PDP to talk about some of the employment challenges that are faced by people with different abilities and how technology can help build employable skills. So over to you, Omer.
Thank you, Sahir. And thank you, everyone, for inviting us, Now PDP, to participate in this panel. We're humbled by your invite and a very, very happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities as well to all the panelists and those listening. Uh, we are an organization that has been focused for the last 12 years on employment opportunities, primarily in developing skill sets, so that we can bridge the gap between the demand side and the supply side. So before we begin, I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the barriers to employment that we have identified and that we feel persons with disabilities face while trying to get into the job market. First and foremost is the provision of relevant education, which we feel in the past opportunities have been lacking for the appropriate education to be imparted across the spectrum of disabilities, be that visually impaired, the deaf, physically impaired, intellectually impaired, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the biggest barriers, is to have an appropriate education. Another element is the lack of employers' forthrightness to employ persons with disabilities, their willingness to employ persons with disabilities because of preconceived notions about what a person with disability can contribute. They are mostly stemming from the fact that a sympathetic approach is the underlying feature that influences people's outlook on disabilities to this date in Pakistan. And the need of the hour is for an empathetic outlook. Third thing is the inaccessibility of facilities, of offices, of buildings where persons with disabilities can get employment. The physical accessibility as well as the mental inaccessibility of people who they are working with. So not only the buildings, but the attitudes of the individuals who are there as well. So that's the third issue that we face there. Once these things are overcome, then you have the challenge of sustainable employment because there are no policies that are in place at institutions. So if a well-meaning individual who's hired a person with disability leaves the institution, then there is no sustainability of policy to sustain that person's employment within the said uh, institution. So that's again a challenge that we face. And I think one of the biggest challenges in this age of economic need is the low pay that is usually given to persons with disabilities. Federally mandated minimum wage in Pakistan is 17,500 rupees, which is, if you ask anyone on the street right now, negligible and peanuts compared to what things demand. So I think that's another challenge that people face. So the five issues that we have identified or barriers to employment in broad strokes are relevant education, lack of employers willing to bring people on board, inaccessibility of facilities and attitudes, lack of inclusive policies, and a very low pay. So these are the challenges that have been laid out. We have realized, or based on disparate studies in the past, that about 71% of persons with disabilities remain unemployed. Again, this is an estimate. This is by no means an exact number. And that means that about $16 billion worth of loss to the annual GDP, if you go by the number of 15% of a population of a country being disabled. So $16 billion a year are almost lost to the GDP by not including persons with disabilities in the workforce. And this is why big data becomes so important. Pakistan does not have a very good understanding of the issues at heart of how many people with disabilities exist. So that's the biggest challenge to start off. We cannot highlight the significance of the problem without having the right numbers. And the big data challenges mean that we take estimates and we cannot prioritize this issue as much as we would like. As of the official census, as of 2017, only 110 1 million people with disabilities have been registered in the NADRA, which is the National Database of Persons. So that's one of the biggest challenges from a digitization perspective, that if you don't have enough big data available, we will not be able to make the appropriate interventions. Then, as I highlighted, there is a challenge between the supply side and the demand side. What is required by the market is not often what is provided by the skill set giving institutions, vocational training centers, education centers, and so forth. So there is a case to be made for effective mapping of job skills against what is required in the market. And Pakistan, being primarily an agrarian country and not as digitally savvy as others, the requirement is for an in-person participation for jobs, as opposed to work from home or computer-based jobs that can be done from anywhere in the world. So that's the third problem. So lack of data, a lack of mapping, and I think in-person jobs that are required to be partaken upon. Some of the recommendations that we have come up with for bridging this gap have been brought upon us, I feel, with the onset of COVID-19. As more and more opportunities which would have become available down the line have now become necessary to happen right now. Maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, inclusion would have happened digitally, but because of COVID, we've had to adjust our approaches. Banks, institutions, other employers have had to allow people to work from home. And this is where the opportunity for persons with disabilities also exists. We strongly feel that there are swaths and swaths of documents that lie in government offices, that lie across the country in all offices, that need to be digitized, that need to be converted into a digital database that can easily be done by persons with disabilities with some upskilling and some training. So this will create a job opportunity for a person with disability, will also solve the issue of having tons and tons of paper that is lying around these government offices to be digitized. The other solution that we have identified is that more and more people are moving to e-commerce platforms. That creates opportunities for digital creators like Hassan. That create opportunities for website making, web design, social media, marketing, sales. Everything that required an in-person participation can now be done with some little upskilling while sitting at home and allowing people to practice what they feel they were needed in person for. So I feel on the public sector side, the government can step up and identify those individuals who with some little training can become computer savvy to digitize all this information that they've collected in paper form across the country. On the private sector side, I feel e-commerce platforms and digital platforms can be utilized for web making and the entire life cycle or ecosystem of inclusion through e-commerce as well. Finally, I feel the bulk of the population of persons with disabilities also resides in your rural areas. For this, we feel that the mobile penetration, which is at about 75% in the country, can be utilized to bring them into the mainstream. And how can we do this? Each district in Pakistan has a special education school that can be made a community hub for technology and upskilling, that can, sort of bring people together in one district so that the digital and mobile platforms are used to impart information and to give them skills which they otherwise would not have been able to have. So my request right now is that for the government and the private sector to work hand in glove for solving some of the challenges that we face in the non-urban areas by, piggybacking of mobile technology and utilizing these centers, expansive centers of disability that lie in every district to become hubs of knowledge, information, and digitization that can then be used to not only digitize information, create jobs, but also create an ecosystem of inclusion through e-commerce platforms. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Umair, for that wonderfully comprehensive presentation. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the employment and inclusion space through technology. Technology is a great enabler. Monica spoke about how we have been working with the hearing impaired community in Thailand, for instance, to train them to use Facebook and social media platforms to become entrepreneurs and how to promote their businesses. That's just one small example of what technology can do. But all of this sort of rests reflects also or depends on the formal education sector in Pakistan. And to talk about what the formal education sector in Pakistan needs to do um, to promote greater inclusion and to promote the right kind of learning, both for persons with disabilities and others, to create a more inclusive environment. I'm now going to invite Bela Raza Jamil. She is the CEO of the Idara-e Taaleem o Agahi, and she's going to talk to us about what needs to happen in the education sector across Pakistan to promote greater inclusion. Over to you, Bela.
Thank you very much to DeafReach and Facebook for this awesome roundtable. I think what has preceded already is so inspiring, starting with Hassan and then Monica on cutting edge solutions, digital technology solutions to issues of inclusion. And then, of course, Omer, who's always very inspiring on what can be done on employability. But I think I'd like to start, first of all, with the issue of the urgent need for big data sets, which will first of all establish for us what is the scale of persons with disabilities in Pakistan. And sadly, as we know, that whether it was the census of 2017 or other estimates, we end up being woefully short on where the challenges lies and what the scope and scale of the issue is. Well, we at ITA were decided to take a deep dive in this whole area because, you know, our biggest flagship program is ASER, the Annual Status of Education Report, where since 2009 we've been collecting data on learning. And then we realized, why are we not doing this for children with disabilities? We collect data on 5 to 16 years of age. And we started this journey in 2016. By 2018, we thought this is all right to start off on the usual disabilities, but we should go to the Washington group of disabilities with 11 functionings. And then we invited on board both DeafReach and Sight Savers so that we could make our learning tools inclusive and we could have them in Pakistan Sign Language, but also in Braille. So the good news was that now we have got learning tools so that they are inclusive and we have them for these two groups. What came out from our big data sets from Punjab and Sindh was that we found that 15.5% of our children 5 to 16, that is the age group of right to education as well, were children who were suffering with some form of disability or the other. What was even more exciting from that data set was to see that almost 76% of the children were in some kind of education institution. And most of those institutions, this is children with disabilities, were in education institutions, and a large percentage of those were government schools. Now that is so interesting that we have children already mainstreamed, who've mainstreamed themselves, which means households are keen for the children to have education. But sadly, the facilities or the accessibility or the inclusive aspect of workforce preparation, which is teachers who are prepared to deal with this, is woefully low. What is also interesting is that most of the secondary schools where the children were had computer laboratory labs of some kind or the other. We also have data sets where we have almost 80% plus who have got some form of cell phone. In some areas, in urban areas, more than 95% have got cell phones, and androids are catching up as well. So you have a huge technology moment. But so in terms of assistive technologies, while we see them in schools catering for special education children, but those are the places where very few children go to. As you know, Punjab has just 35 to 40,000 children in all its special education institutions. Most of the children actually go to mainstream schools. So we need to really come up with ways and means where these wonderful cutting edge solutions in technology can be deployed. And that means to be able to do that, we need a focus on teacher training. In the recent launch of the Global Education Monitoring Report that we did for GEM UNESCO with the Federal Education Ministry in Islamabad with Shafqat Mahmood Saab, there was a clear acknowledgement that the data and the understanding on inclusion remains below par, and particularly for teacher preparation. We feel that this is a big opportunity with a group like this and the solutions that are coming up in technology. We should be able to take this to teacher education, to education facilities, and there is good data on education facilities of the public sector quite a bit, especially at secondary level, where we can do something very powerful, from recognizing children with disabilities who are already in schools, but teachers do not really know what to do with them, and coming up with solutions such as that of Hassan, young people, finding young leaders who can inspire others, and we can find how to bring on board not just the usual matriculate or FA, BA type of studies, but also technical skills in what would be seen as digitally enabled skilled for the 21st century. I wanted to end with saying a few things about the sadness of COVID and how in the COVID period, education for children with disabilities, or in fact, everyone with disabilities, whether it is schools or tertiary education, there has been a complete silence on that. DeafReach has been very supportive in converting some of the tele school materials in Pakistan Sign Language, so that our story bites on teleschool went with the Pakistan Sign Language. But sadly, this is a period where we should be thinking of, one, that why there has been a silence on children and the issues of children with disabilities in education, but also look at it as a big opportunity to turn this around for really making inclusive learning possible. We have come a long way in data. We've come a long way in technology. There are more cutting edge solutions coming in terms of software and technology, such as those shared by Facebook, but also young leaders like Hassan who need to be out there, and we need to find many more. I want to end by saying that there is one, Kiran Ishtiaq, who is physically disabled in Rahim Yar Khan, who's sitting there at 23 years of age in a college doing her BA honors in English, and is one of our great supporters and heroes of what can be possible and what the people who are children or students with disability have already done by mainstreaming themselves in a government college, but willing to be the spokesperson for students with disability and showing what they can do without any arms and limbs, being able to use not just an Android and smartphone, but is also completely functional and superb on laptops and computers. So really, we have to look for all of them together, connect the dots, and really create a possibility where all means all. And the government is committed to it, and the government is trying to provide some support, but we need to accelerate it far more. I think with a community like this, we can truly reach the skies when it comes to inclusion in Pakistan. We are at a very low level, but I think acceleration can be possible with technology and with super leaders like we have today.
Thank you so much, Bela, for those wise and inspirational words. We know that the government has a big role to play in inclusion, and we are very grateful and thankful to the First Lady of Pakistan, Mrs. Samina Alvi, for joining us today. She is someone who has been a great supporter and champion of inclusion for all, for vulnerable groups. And I would now like to invite her to speak to us about the commitments that the government can make. And like Bela mentioned, this is so essential to making Pakistan inclusive for everyone. So I'd like to call upon the First Lady to talk to us about the government's commitment to making Pakistan more inclusive and more accessible to people with disabilities. Over to you, Mrs. Alvi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Seher, Tariq. And sorry about joining late because we are having a program for persons with disability. Today is 3rd December. And all my distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to thank Deaf Reach and Facebook for making this event possible and inviting me to share my thought as such a sensitive issue. I personally always feel that differently abled persons are equally part of our society. But due to various reasons, they feel themselves deprived and neglected. They have different abilities and needs. It is therefore imperative and to organize such webinars which will not only create awareness about this important segment of our society, but also to think about the ways and means to improve accessibility and remove deprivation from the special persons. I'm sure that the speakers in the roundtable will provide their valuable input and share their experiences and expertise to empowering differently abled persons through digital literacy and connectivity. Our government is very much concerned about the issues and their solution of differently abled persons. Job quotas for the special person has been enhanced by the provisional governments, and we are strictly monitoring the compliance of instructions of the government regarding observance of quota in government organization, and I think also in private organization. I always request the private organization to please ensure the job opportunities of differently abled person. We also determined to provide all kinds of opportunities to them and trying to give them all their rights. Since last few years, I was observing that all public and private buildings in different cities must have ramps to facilitate the differently abled persons. For this purpose, President of Pakistan had directed the concerned department to ensure construction of ramps at public and private buildings. Even if possible, removable ramps can be used in daytime for the special persons in various buildings. You would appreciate that Pakistan has also important initiatives to ensure financial empowerment of differently abled persons. I would like to share State Bank of Pakistan has directed all banks to ensure availability of ramps in their banks and accessibility of differently abled person by 30th December 2020. Further, they have also directed to provide out of queue assistance to differently abled person in all banks. Similarly, the State Bank of Pakistan is working on the plan to facilitate person and visual impairment of installing talking ATM, providing ATM, debit and internet banking facilities, and organizing countrywide awareness sessions on featuring of currency notes for educating the differently abled persons. They have also introduced attractive schemes for differently abled persons. They are able to get loans for certain duration on minimum markups. And Yesterday, we had a meeting with the CDA in Islam and housing in Islamabad, and they also promised that they will make ramps for these people in all Markaz, and they will make friendly parks also in Islamabad. We have started from Islamabad, and inshallah, we'll go all over Pakistan also. Our government has also focused to provide technical education and vocational training to the differently abled person. Directorate of Special Education has developed a special app which is very helpful in guiding and educating differently abled persons. We need to develop more IT resources and impart skills in differently able persons with the aim to foster inclusion. We need to provide proper training to teach teachers about the principle of accessible education and by developing newer IT tools for differently abled persons. That's what Omar is helping us from now PDP. They are having a certain education centers and vocational centers. In the end, I would like to that differently abled persons are an important segment of our society. They need special care, and it is collective responsibility of society to address their needs and take steps for their welfare. We need to encourage them and empower them to create a sense of inclusiveness among them. We also need to focus on providing all fundamental rights to differently abled persons to ensure their participation in political, economic, social, and cultural sector of our society. And I'm so happy that we all are here to work for the good cause, and inshallah, we are able to bring some change in Pakistan. And thank you for taking my opinions and about this. Allah will help us and for the good cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Alvi, the First Lady of Pakistan, for your time, for outlining the wonderful work and the initiatives that the government is doing. And I hope that we can continue to support the government and other organizations that are working in this area to do different things to support people with disabilities. One
Yes,
such
inshallah.
organization that is been working in this space is the Internet Society. And joining us today in the panel is Mohammad Shabir Awan. He is the president of the Accessibility Special Interest Group in the Internet Society. Shabir is going to talk to us about some of the initiatives that organizations like the Internet Society are taking to make technology more accessible, and will share insights on what more we need to do and focus on to make technology more accessible. So over to you, Shabir.
Thank you very much, Sahar. And thank you very much to Facebook and their team for inviting Internet Society and myself to speak in this August gathering. Before me, many eloquent speakers have spoken and a lot have been discussed. With regards to Internet Society, before I talk about that, I would like to state that as a person with disability myself who faces visual impairment, I know better than anyone else that what technology has and can achieve for people with disabilities. This is an age of technology where people with visual impairment were unable to sit in these CSS exams in Pakistan. And it was the use and ability of people with visual impairment, use of the technology that they were able to demonstrate and convince the government people that this is an exam from which people with visual impairment should and cannot be excluded. And now we have seen that there are a number of people with visual impairment as well as other disabilities serving in the superior services of Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, Internet Society is a global organization that basically works for the development, standards, and growth of the Internet. And our slogan is the Internet is for everyone and should be used as a force for good. When we say that Internet is for everyone, we also include people with disabilities. Of course, how can we exclude people with disabilities, which is 15% according to different various estimates. So Internet Society's accessibility special interest groups works to make the Internet and allied technologies accessible for people with disabilities. We started last year. It was an initiative of people with disabilities. Uh, and though the organization is based and headquartered in USA, but it functions through different chapters and staff, which is spread all around the world. Internet Society has about over 20 chapters in different parts of the world. Here in Pakistan, we have a chapter which is Islamabad chapter. So in Pakistan, Internet Society has worked on digital technologies on a number of initiatives and projects. This includes the formulation of digital IT policy, which was formulated and exposed on the in 2018. Government of Pakistan has initiated this policy, and we are now about to implement this policy. This is an initiative which is very important, because if we want to make digital technologies accessible, at the first place we need to make policy uh, realize that these are the people whose needs ought to be taken care of. Secondly, the First Lady talked about the ramps in the instructions that were given by the State Bank to its subsidiaries and financial institutions to make ramps in the banks. You would be surprised that before 2014, banks in Pakistan would not allow people with visual impairment to use internet banking or to carry credit or debit cards. They would require a person with visual impairment to have someone taken to them in the bank branch physically as a witness and then withdraw their cash. It was a hard task in which I also was involved to convince that these technologies are something which can make financial transactions through digital means accessible, easier, secure for person with disabilities. In the same vein, we, with the cooperation of PTA, have organized a training for government developers, because we are also talking about making websites and digital technologies accessible, but how to make them accessible. So Internet Society last year invited an international trainer in Pakistan, and here with the support of ISAC Islamabad chapter, we trained the government officials and developers to how to make the websites accessible. So we are hoping that the government websites would be made accessible. Lastly, taking advantage of the First Lady's presence, I hope she could be the voice of people with particularly visual impairment. And I say this particularly because people with visual impairment use screen readers to access digital technologies. So far, we have had screen readers in a number of languages, and they are, if you count, over 50. But unfortunately, our national language, Urdu, is not included in that list. So I hope and I trust that the First Lady would take personal interest. It is unfortunate that I, as a visually impaired, can read English, Arabic, Persian, Hindi, Russian, whatever languages, over 50 languages. The literature is available and accessible to me. But how unfortunate is this, that if I want to read my own culture, my own heritage, my own literature in my own national language, I have to use a human assistant. So this is the dire need that we should have an Urdu screen reader software for people with visual impairment in Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a number of things, but I leave here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shabir, for sharing your insights and some great ideas for what we need to do more of. You spoke about how the Internet Society has collaborated with the government for different initiatives. I think collaborations between the public sector and the private sector can be very powerful. Next, I would like to invite to share with us on this topic of public-private partnership, actually, and what can be done and how public-private partnerships can facilitate more interventions for people with disabilities. I'd like to invite Qasim Naveed Qamar, who is the Special Assistant to the Chief Minister of Sindh for the Department of Empowerment of People with Disabilities. So over to you, Qasim, to share some thoughts on how governments and the private sector and other NGOs and all can collaborate to bring forth innovations, new ideas, and pilot them. Over to you, Qasim.
Thank you, Seher. I'd like to start by wishing everyone a very happy 3rd of December, International Day of Disabilities. And just because of that, it's been an extremely busy day, and then I've got another event coming up, so I'm going to keep this a little bit brief. But again, thank you, Monica and Facebook, Richard, DeafReach, FESF, you guys for putting this together. It's an amazing opportunity. It's been very informative for me to hear about some of the initiatives, for example, being started by Facebook. So in 2018, I took charge of this department, and unfortunately before that, the government and the private sector had been working in silos. And whereas the government had the numbers in terms of the scale of schools that they had across the province, the private sector was actually more focused and able to improve the quality of education being given, for example, in their schools. So initially we started working on and passing this law that's actually a very, very comprehensive law in our province of Sindh, which sort of fosters the need for public-private partnerships moving forward. Unfortunately, in the past, the way it's happened is that, like I said, they've been working in silos, and there's no sort of mechanism where each could complement the other. So, for example, our law has this amazing initiative for a council, which has a majority of members from the private sector, who are doing a terrific job all across the province, to get ideas from them for capacity building of our own schools. For example, we have 70 schools right now, and one of the new initiatives that we're working on with FESF and now PDP, amongst others as well, is this flagship school in Sujawal, which is a very small district in the province of Sindh. So the idea and the vision behind this was to get experts from each disability together into one sort of complex, where they can and work simultaneously with a ratio with government teachers and staff to build their capacity, as well as provide education for the differently abled in that district. And then these centers are also expected to serve as as hubs in the community for not just education but healthcare, for providing CNICs, which are their national ID cards, employment, like I said, so all of these things. So government of Sindh and the DEPD has been very forthcoming in public-private partnerships of this kind. And a couple of things that were mentioned here today, for example, something that Umair and Bela both touched upon, was the serious need for data. Unfortunately, our last census, this question was kept out of it, and because of that, we really struggle because if we had all the data and if it was easily compiled for us, we could provide those services in those districts, given a specific need, a specific disability, for example. But we don't have that, and that's something that we're struggling with, and we're trying to find means around it. But a provincial government cannot alone sort of carry out a census. So we're looking, always looking for out-of-the-box solutions, not just for data collection, but also for education. For example, right now, because of COVID, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of work on distance learning, and FESF again with the WeThink platform has done a really remarkable job, and I hope that we could learn from that and sort of scale it up to the level that would be ideal across the province to get more people on board and spread education for deaf people across the province, for example. Again, technology, Facebook, a huge company. There's a lot that they are working on, which I'd love to get to know more about in terms of accessibility. But for employment, I would think that I feel like there's a huge scope for people to get training. We have a huge usage of mobile phones, smartphones across the province and across the country. And I think we really need to capitalize on that and sort of use that as a tool to spread the message for education, but also for training of people to further build on those skills and perhaps be able to employ themselves or train themselves to work for employment to sustain themselves. So these are a few things. We're working with a lot of NGOs and DPOs in the province of Sindh, and we continue to look forward to these collaborations and out-of-the-box ideas. But platforms like this are very informative, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from the other listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasim. It's always great to hear when people in government want to work on out-of-the-box solutions. And I do think that that's what we need. So thank you for being a champion for those and being a champion for this cause. This is a cause that is globally important also, not just for Pakistan. We know that today is the UN mandated day for persons with disabilities. So next, I'd like to invite our second last speaker, Dr. Amina Zia. She is the United Nations representative on ECOSOC for FESF, and I want her to share with us some of sort of the global frameworks in which the UN and other global organizations are thinking about people with disabilities, particularly in a post-COVID world, and what kinds of support or interventions are available from a global perspective to people in Pakistan and to organizations in Pakistan that we can leverage. So over to you, Dr. Amina.
Thank you, Sahar. Thank you. First of all, I'm very appreciative of dialogues like this one this morning here, where we discuss, the needs, the priorities, and the policy to ensure that we have sustainable growth and inclusive development. And Hassan, your leadership and your journey on social media is truly an inspiration. So I am, as Sahar mentioned, I am a social impact consultant. My work primarily is around the United Nations ECOSOC, and I work on multi-stakeholder approaches to sustainable development. As we have, entered this kind of a COVID-19 pandemic shadow globally, we have, realized that there are frameworks that are coming out of the UN and other international bodies that look at how do we resolve, how do we deal, how do we ensure that we have inclusive policies and mandates for persons with disabilities. And so for a number of years now, since 2015, when the global goals were adopted by world leaders, I have had the honor of representing FESF FESF Deaf Reach at the United Nations, and because FESF holds a very special consultative status. And congratulations to Now PDP as well, because I am told that as of recent, Now PDP also has that same stakeholder status at the United Nations. So congratulations, Omera, to you and your team. But most recently, in response to the Secretary General's call for equal access to opportunities and inclusion within the COVID-19 response and recovery framework, I want to point out that Deaf Reach has taken the lead in highlighting the urgency to tackle obstacles, barriers, injustices, and discrimination as highlighted in the historic Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We have a number of commissions and high-level forums coming up in the new year, and FESF will be hosting site events and other intervention modalities. Today is special, right? So today marks the 13th session of the Conference of States Parties to the Convention at the United Nations as we commemorate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And, you know, like I said, in the shadow of COVID-19 pandemic, we are reminded that the pandemic has deepened pre-existing inequalities that affect the world's, billion persons with disabilities, and access to education, healthcare, jobs, etc., are met with, additional structural barriers, exclusions, and discrimination during this crisis. As we have heard today, that inclusion and accessibility is a must. We know that collaboration through stakeholder governance and approaches ensure inclusive and sustainable development. And it is also, something that forces the discussion on power hierarchies, on political representation, on public policy, on the bureaucracy of the education system. Bela mentioned that a little bit. And as the approaches evolve, we know that inclusiveness and transparency, along with collective responsibility and effective decision-making, are utilized towards, a genuine commitment, as we heard from Qasim, towards ensuring that our marginalized communities are brought to the table. So this dialogue today brings us all together to realize the importance of sharing best practices, and also from learning from each other's space, and to build impactful goals and relationships. I do want to mention that FESF Deaf Reach serves as a stakeholder at the recent launch of the UN-wide disability inclusion strategy, which calls to bring about, very lasting and transformative change. Through the written statements and intervention modalities, as I mentioned earlier, at various UN commissions and high-level forums, FESF team has consistently made recommendations to Pakistan and to other developing member states to improve the digital inclusion by developing technology infrastructures, by providing affordable access, enhancing digital skills capacity, and also by identifying, the connected and the unconnected communities. I think we heard a little bit about the rural and the urban divide. And one of the top priorities has been and continues to be the access of digital technology and specifications of a policy space or civil society participation to ensure that there is this, substantive sort of a public-private partnership that truly develops for the purpose of implementing change. And, I believe it was Omer who mentioned policies as a barrier, as a very real challenge, which of course cuts across education, teacher training, teacher prep, as Bela highlighted, also marketplace employment and other areas. So I do want to share briefly that, FESF is recognized on the international platforms for disability inclusion as a priority, as a core values of the organization rest on the strength of the partnerships and the public spaces, right, with regional and national governments to allow for that political will that is always necessary within the private space, of course, with corporations to commit resources. And then again, within the civil society space to enhance that sort of a human capital leverage by facilitating networks to ensure that we do advance the rights and inclusions of persons with disabilities. So, I refer to this always in my work as a triangle, this collaboration as a triangle, which is absolutely necessary to a part of the mandate to secure solution-based relationships. And I also want to highlight that something that Omer mentioned, the need for disaggregate data. And Monica, this is a place that I feel that we can utilize holistic digital platforms like Facebook to help to work in collaboration with civil society. And of course, Qasim, as you mentioned in your area, the public space, to ensure that partnerships are there and that we do facilitate sort of this capacity building that you mentioned to allow for policy mandates, right? So the need for collective behavior through multi-stakeholder partnerships, I believe, is evident by this inclusive dialogue today, and is necessary because it does translate into that accountability to ensure that minority participation towards, securing a very socially just transition towards inclusive development that ensures dignity and equity, right? So yeah, I look forward to working. I look forward to finding ways to harness the political will, the technology and innovation and resources. And I'm also looking forward to continuing this conversation with all of you offline, so that we can, continue to kind of come together through our diverse knowledge and wisdom, as Richard mentioned earlier, and as Omer mentioned, to create sort of a holistic ecosystem of inclusion. So with that, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. I think this is a very substantive and much needed conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Amina. And now for our last panelist for the day to round off this discussion, we thought it would also be important to take a look at the broader regional landscape. So joining us today is Isuru Samaratunga. He is a senior researcher at Learn Asia, and he's going to talk to us about some of the policy and technology interventions to address barriers to independent living from across the region, and what's working, what's not working. And we hope that this can give us all some food for thought for what more we can do in Pakistan, and how we can continue this conversation, and how we can continue to think out of the box. So over to Isuru, who I know also has a presentation to share. So Isuru, over to you. And if you could also please share your screen.
Right. Thank you very much. Hope you can see my screen. Right. Okay. So let me give you a brief note on organization that I represent. Learn Asia is a Colombo-based, Sri Lanka-based organization, but we work across Asia Pacific regions, basically on policy-oriented research projects and on policy recommendations and things like that. And right. So these are the countries that we worked. It is a pro-poor, pro-market Asia Pacific think tank. And just to give you some idea about our engagement with the PWDs. So our work started in 2015, about 5 years ago, in Myanmar, where we did qualitative research with PWDs. Then we have done quantitative and qualitative research projects in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka as well. So where we quantified disability types and their barriers to access to mainstream. It can be education or health services or ICT usage or something like that. And so what I'm going to take you through is what are the problems faced by PWDs when it comes to accessing health services. So that's the specific area that I'm going to talk about, because mostly if you think about the people with hearing and speech impairments, so mainly from the research what we saw, that mainly they were talking about the barriers in the communication process. So they felt like more vulnerable and felt like more excluded from the mainstream when it comes to communication. And but if you take about the journey of a patient when it comes to availing health services. So it will start from getting an appointment, then reaching the medical center, then navigation in the building, and communicating with the health professionals, and also then things like understanding the prescriptions and buying drugs or medicine. So all this process, every person has to go through. But with persons with disabilities, you find a lot of communication barriers, as well as a lot of other barriers in when it comes to accessing health services. So uh, uh, most of our respondents in the research projects I was telling you, they had this communication barrier, especially with the hearing and speech impairment. So they were given wrong medicine, and probably sometimes wrong medication, and they had a lot of issues of accessing the services. So through our research projects, what we wanted to suggest as policy recommendations and technology interventions, like uh, for the people with speech and hearing impairment, I mean, when it comes to communicate with the doctors and health professionals, we might need kind of a interface to use sign language, and probably to interact with doctors, a kind of a digital solution to communicate basic health needs, and to communicate symptoms and all that. Then when it comes to navigating the building space, I mean, if you can make the signboards and all those stuff in an accessible manner, then that will help the PWDs to access health services. And lastly, during emergencies, there are a lot of dependencies of PWDs, because they have to depend on someone else. So that was mentioned in the research by the respondent. So how do you make the existing emergency infrastructure more accessible? So you will see that we need both policy interventions as well as technology interventions. And we saw a lot of interventions that can be done through smartphones, and introduction of app solutions can help in all these things. So so that's all I have to mention under access to health services. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isru, for sharing that. I think health is just, such a basic human need, and access to health services is such an important area for all of us. This really So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this very important conversation. We hope that you will share with us your suggestions, your thoughts, questions in the comments below on the Facebook page for DeafReach, where you will see this video. And we look forward to keeping this conversation going and figuring out ways in which we can make the internet inclusive and available to everybody. And thank you for joining, and a very happy International Day for Persons with Disabilities.
Thank you all. Thank you, Marine, for your interpretation as well. You kept up with all of us.
And thank
Yes,
you, Sahar.
absolutely. Biggest
Sahar.
thanks to Marine for being such an
Super, as
excellent
usual.
interpreter for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marine.
Goodbye.